Hi, my name is Ionela Stodor and I'm going to show you how you can develop and maintain XML schemas using Oxygen XML editor. You are going to see how to create a simple schema in Oxygen design page and the features from the design page. Then how Oxygen helps you to maintain a complex schema and some refactoring actions. And after that, how you can generate documentation for an XML schema. At the beginning, I am going to create a simple schema from scratch, add new components just using the drag and drop, import the schema module, refer components defined in other schemas, and edit attributes in place. I switch now to Oxygen. In Oxygen, you can create an XML schema from various sources, but for this demonstration, I've chosen to create a simple schema from scratch. So I click New, XML Schema, and Create. This is Oxygen design page and the palette view. Here are all the components that can be inserted into the schema. They are functionally organized into 4 categories: basic components, compositors and wildcards, directives, identity constraints. Now I want to create an XML schema for a purchase order. Let's see how a purchase order looks like. I have here an example. You've noticed that a purchase order has a number, which is an unique number, so an ID. It has a date, a bill to element, some items, and a ship to element. To insert an element into my schema, I just drag the element component from the palette view and drop it into my schema. Here I'm inserting a name, let's say PO. For this PO element, I want to set 2 attributes, ID and date. To set the ID attribute, I just drag it from the palette view and connect it with the PO element. I'm inserting a name, ID. For the ID, I have to set a type. To set a type for an attribute, I just drag the simple type component and connect it with the ID. Here I'm inserting the type, let's say XSID. You can see also the content completion assistant that Oxygen provides. In a similar way, I set also the date attribute. You've noticed that I cannot insert it into an invalid position. This is graphically shown by this red line connector. So always when you work in the design page, Oxygen keeps your schema valid because you cannot insert components in invalid positions. So I insert it here, choosing the date name. To set the date type, I just drag the simple type. So now I've set the ID and the date attributes for the PO. I have now to insert the bill to element, the items, and the ship to element. To insert the bill to, I just drag the element and drop it here. Say bill to. You've noticed that Oxygen automatically inserts a sequence. You can change it just by double clicking here to all or choice, but I want it to remain a sequence. In the same way, I insert also the ship to and the items. You've noticed that for these elements, I haven't set a type. Not yet. They define more complex types, so I'm reusing a couple of types defined in other schema. In this way, you will also going to see how you can import a schema module. To import a schema, I just drag the import from here. I have to search for my schema. You've noticed that this schema has another namespace. Oxygen detects it, and you can see it here. After I've imported this schema, I can see here all its structure and the components. This feature is available only in the design mode. In text mode, all that I can see is a reference to the imported module. Now that I have the address type defined, I can set this type for the build to and ship to elements. To accomplish this, I just drag the address and connect it with the build to element. The complex type address belongs to another namespace, so Oxygen helps you to set a prefix for that namespace. You can see here suggested prefix PO. I just hit OK, and the address type is prefixed with the PO namespace. In the same way, I set the address for the ship to element. Now the PO prefix is already set from the previous operation. And for the N items is a sequence of one or more item elements. So I just drag the item from here, connect it to items. Oxygen automatically inserts the sequence. But because into a PO you can have one or more items, I need to adjust the arity for the item element. So just right click and unbound it. This little arrow from here leads you to the component definition. So here you can see the definition for the item element. If you want to change the order for this element, all you need to do is to drag one of them and drop it in a new position. And also, if you want to rename an element or an attribute, you can do this very easily just by double clicking here and changing the name. Let's say PO. Now that I have my XML schema defined, I can generate a sample XML file for it. This XML file will be further used to input the purchase order data. For the generation, I just go in Tools, Generate Sample XML Files. Here I choose my schema, and in my case the root element is the PO, so I'm choosing the PO here and hit OK. You can see here the sample XML file that is automatically opened in Oxygen. So how the Oxygen design page helps you? You can visualize and understand the structure of the schema. You can insert elements just by dragging them and drop them in a new position. And the most important thing is that Oxygen helps you to get a valid schema. You will always have a valid schema because you are not allowed to insert components in invalid positions. Now, let's talk about developing and maintaining complex XML schemas. This means determining the editing schema context, creating a validation rule, getting all referable components for a schema, and learning how to use search and refactoring actions. In my project, I have included a folder XHTML 1.1 which contains a complex schema. When you edit a complex schema composed of multiple modules, it is very important to know how these modules are connected to each other and their interdependencies. To have a quick overview of the schema hierarchy, I'm using the resource hierarchy action. Right-click on one of these schemas and select Resource Hierarchy. Here you can see how the schema modules are structured. Now I want to edit one of these schemas. For instance, I'm opening XHTML list 1. You can see that here I have errors. Oxygen considers this schema as invalid. Schemas that are included in other schema modules may not validate by themselves. You cannot validate only this schema because it contains references to elements declared in other modules. So I have to validate my schema in the main context. To determine which is the master schema for these modules, I am using the Resource Dependencies action. Right-click and select Resource Dependencies. This action shows me that my schema is included in these two schemas, XHTML Basic 1.0 and XHTML 1.1. In order to have my schema validated correctly, I have to configure a new validation scenario, and at master schema, I choose these two schemas. So I press configure validation scenario, new, and here I have to add XHTML 1.1 and XHTML Basic 1.0. Now I have this module validated correctly and the entire structure is validated. I know that if I make modifications in my schema, they are correct. So after I've configured the validation scenario and validated my schema with it, also the Content Completion Assistant provides me valid elements. You can see here the Content Completion Assistant, and also see that these elements are from other schemas, because these elements are collected from the entire structure, not only from my current schema. In a similar way, the outline view shows me valid elements in a given context. You can filter these elements to show all components, to show referable components, or to show only local components. I filter to show referable components. Another powerful feature in Oxygen is the ability to use refactoring actions. In my case, I want to rename a schema element. For example, the list item element. I'm searching for the LI in the outline view. After I select the LI element, you can see that it is automatically highlighted in the document. Now that I want to rename the LI, I need to know, is this element used only in my schema or in which other schemas it is used? For this, I'm invoking the Component Dependencies action. Right-click on the LI and select Component Dependencies. Here you can see that the LI element is referred in these two elements. To determine if these elements are from the current schema or from another one, you have to read the tooltip. Reading the URL from the tooltip, you can see that this element is from my current schema, XHTML list 1. Also the other element is from my current schema. You can also double click on this element and see that the current schema remains opened. Now I can rename the LI because I found out that it is used only in my module. To rename it, I'm using the Quick Assist is this yellow bulb here. So I can click on it and rename component. Here I'm choosing the new name for the li, let's say list item. I can preview the modifications and you can see that the li is renamed with list item. And if you decide that these changes are correct, just hit rename. And the li is renamed with list item. Let's now rename another element. For example, the order list element. I'm searching for the OL in the outline, selecting the OL element. In a similar way, I determine where this element is used. Right click, select component dependencies. Reading the tooltip, you can see that these elements are from other schemas, XHTML Basic 1.0 Model 1 and XHTML 1.1 Model 1. So when I rename it, rename component, I'm choosing the new name for it, order list. You can see that when I preview the modifications, are shown the modification done in all the modules where the order list is used. You can see here all the modifications. If you decide that these changes are correct, just hit rename. And the OOL is renamed with order list. Now, to summarize, when you edit a complex schema, it is very important to see the entire hierarchy, see the dependencies between the modules, validate the schemas in the main context, determine the referable elements. To determine the referable elements, you can use either the outline view or the content completion assistant, and using search and refactoring actions. After you've developed your XML schema, you also need the documentation for it. Oxygen offers support to edit the documentation in design mode. You can see the annotations that are inserted here, author, and text mode. Also here is an annotation. To generate the documentation, you can use either Generate Documentation button from here, or Tools, Generate Documentation, Schema Documentation. Oxygen provides different output formats to generate it: HTML, PDF, DocBook, or a custom format. There is also an option for the language, you can see it here. So after I hit Generate, I have the schema documentation. It includes a table of contents. You can see it here in the left side. The element can be grouped by namespace, location, and component type. The location is the component system ID. The system ID means the exact location where these components are defined. For each schema component, you can collapse some details using the showing view. For example, if I disable the diagrams, you can see that the diagrams are not shown anymore. And also, for each component, you have all the information needed: namespace, annotation, diagram, type, properties, where it is used, model, and source. Concluding, Oxygen offers support to edit your documentation in text, design, and author mode, and you have different output formats for your documentation: HTML, PDF, DocBook, or a custom format. This is all for now. Feel free to explore the Oxygen features you've seen in this demonstration and the other videos available on our website. Thank you for watching. Bye!